Hi, I'm Shao. How many prime lenses do you need to cover the range of zoom? Let's say quite a versatile zoom, something like 24 to 105 millimeter, or equivalent, of course. Now, we all know that prime lenses have some plasticity in their focal length. For example, I hope we all understand that if you have a 35 millimeter lens in your bag, you will not need a 40 millimeter lens because they're quite similar. They portray the scene in about the same way, with the same distance to the subject if you stand still, and with very similar perspectives. Every prime lens has some plasticity. So by taking a step forward or a step back, you can make those images taken by a 35 millimeter lens and a 40 millimeter lens indistinguishable, basically. I would say that even when you compare the results from a 35 millimeter and a 50 millimeter lens, you cannot really tell the difference. It's hard to guess which lens took which images. Before we begin addressing this question, you might wonder, why would it be beneficial to replace such a nice high quality zoom lens with a set of primes, which by nature are more limited. They will not give you the same flexibility. There are some reasons to choose a prime over a zoom. The first one is the size of the setup. Zooms tend to be quite large. They need to be as wide as their maximum physical aperture, with the longest range of the zoom, and as long as a prime that is the same focal length as the maximum focal length of the zoom. So by nature, they incorporate some waste of space. The design of zoom lenses is more complex. They incorporate more glass elements than prime, and they tend to incorporate also more low density glass elements that have to be more curved, and they take more space in the lens barrel. Primes, on the other hand, are smaller, or they can be made smaller. Of course, not all of them are, especially some of those modern, very fast, very high quality primes are quite large. They contain the same number of elements as some zooms, and all that glass takes a lot of space. So those lens barrels might be quite large. An example for this would be the new Viltrox 35mm f1.2. This lens is larger than some zooms, and it weighs close to 1 kilogram. So I'm not talking about those primes. I'm talking about more traditional prime lenses with up to 9 or 10 lens elements that can be quite small, even if they offer a wide aperture. The second reason to shoot with a prime is low light or subject separation. You see, primes can be made with wider maximum apertures, which makes them more usable at low light. Those wide apertures allow you more subject separation or thinner depth of field, which is not very relevant in the longer focal length, but with wide lenses you are typically quite limited in terms of subject separation when you use a zoom lens. In fact, I like to cite my rule of the width of the physical aperture. When using a physical aperture smaller than about 10 millimeters, everything tends to be sharp. There is a very large depth of field. To gain some separation that is moderate, but it can still give the viewer some sense of orientation. It can give them a clue about what you focused on, what are the important elements in the scene that tend to be sharper than the rest of the scene, mainly the background. For that, you need a physical aperture of about 20 millimeters. And to achieve a 20 millimeter physical aperture at a wide focal length, like 28 millimeters, you need an aperture of f1.4. Now, I'm not talking about obliterating the background and removing any context from the photograph. This is achievable by much larger physical apertures, like 30 millimeters or more. But to gain some selective focus, you do need a wide aperture. So wide primes do offer an advantage over zooms in terms of allowing some more subject separation. The next reason to prefer primes is the simpler design, simpler structure. That tends to make them a little bit more dimensional, more true to life than zooms that have to contain a lot of glass elements, and in order to make those zooms sharp enough at all focal length and over the entire aperture range, they need to contain more than enough ED glass that really makes them suitable for resolving all the details from a high pixel count sensor. Primes can be made simpler with no ED glass at all. You can just use a crown and some high refractive index glass, and it will give you sufficient sharpness, especially at the center and edges of the frame. I'm not talking about extreme corners that such designs tend to leave a little bit softer, but they will achieve a much sharper result than a zoom made of the same types of glass. The last and maybe most important reason to prefer a prime over a zoom, it has to do with the creative process. With a zoom, the creative process comes down to framing, to considering how large the subject should appear in the frame, and maybe what other elements to include in the frame for a reasonable composition. When you use a prime, framing is a limitation, because you cannot really change the subject size. You have to move for that. So you look at the composition more closely. You have to select the most fitting angle to frame your subject in the scene. You have to look at relations between different elements in the scene. So you pay more attention to composition, and photos taken with prime lenses tend to be a little bit better, a little bit more complex, more thoughtful in their composition. When you zoom, when you rack through the focal lengths of a zoom lens, there are two different aspects of the image coming into effect. The first one is, of course, the size the subject will occupy in the frame. And the second one is perspective. The more you zoom in, elements in the background will become larger. They will take more space in the frame, in an effect called compression. The more you zoom out, decreasing the focal length, elements closer to the camera will become much more prominent, and everything further away from the camera will be pushed back and become smaller, less significant. Using a prime lens, you can, of course, step forward or backward to increase or decrease the size of your subject. But you cannot really change the perspective of the scene. It will always look the same, especially when you have a distant background. However, there are ways to fake a different perspective, even with a given focal length. This faking has a limit, of course. You cannot make a 24mm photograph look like a photograph that was taken with an 85mm lens. There is a surprising amount of plasticity you can still use. Let me explain. By simplifying the scene, you can make the image look like it was shot with a long focal length. By simplifying, I mean including less context in the frame. For example, by tilting the camera upwards. Another consideration is how deep or how layered is the scene on the z-axis. Flat scenes, the extreme example of that would be just a test chart, would not really look different when taken with different focal lengths, because they have no perspective or very little of it. But deeper scenes will make the focal length at which the photograph was made more prominent. Centering the subject in the scene will make the photograph look like it was shot with a longer focal length than it really was. Because by centering the subject you eliminate any corner stretching or distortion that might affect the appearance of it in the photograph. By contrast, pushing your subject towards the edge of the frame will make it look like you used a wider focal length. How much plasticity can you reasonably get from a prime lens? Well, it depends on the focal length. I think that a good rule of thumb for wider focal lengths would be a factor of 1.4. A 35mm lens can be pushed about 1.4 times towards the wide end, which will give you about 25mm, and 1.4 times towards the long end, which would give you 50mm. So it can cover a zoom range, so to speak, of 25 to 50mm. That might be a little bit extreme, but from my experience, I cannot really tell the difference between a photograph shot with a 25mm and a 35mm lens. And I can't tell the difference between a 35mm and a 50mm lens. In most cases. I'm talking about the type of photography I like to do, which is making photos of people at a distance of between 1 and 3 or 4 meters. It would be different for scenes with a much more distant background, like a photograph of a person set in a wide landscape. Anyway, once you cross the 50mm mark, perspective doesn't really change much the longer the focal length. I would like to argue that photograph taken at 60mm and a photograph taken at 300 millimeters from 5 times the distance from the subject would look more or less the same. Our eyes are not trained to really notice such differences in perspective. In those longer focal lengths, you may as well choose your prime lens according to your subject. If you shoot events or portraits, you can usually control the distance from your subject. And it makes sense to use shorter focal lengths in the range between 55 and 85 or 100 millimeters. I do not see any reason to use 150 or 200 millimeter lens for those applications, because those portraits will not really look different if you take them from a longer distance with a longer lens. When you cannot choose the distance between the camera and the subject, like when you are on a sideline of a sports event, or in a concert when you are seated among the audience, you might as well choose a zoom in order to allow for the subject to occupy the proper proportion of the frame. So to answer that question of how many primes you need in order to cover the focal range of a 24 to 105 zoom lens. Well, you could say that 2 prime lenses would be enough. 35 millimeter lens that would cover the range of 25 to 50 millimeter, and then a long lens of your choice. It doesn't really matter, because you can easily compensate for the distance from your subject by moving a few steps forward or a few steps back. But that would be quite a stretch. If you have a preferred working distance, you might use 2 closer together primes. I like having a choice between 2 primes that are not too similar but not too different in their focal length, around my preferred working distance. For example, I shoot at the range of about 28 to 35 millimeters, but sometimes I cannot get as close to my subject. So I use a 28 and a 40 millimeter lens on the wide side of the range. Now, for the longer prime, I like using a 58 millimeter lens that allows me to take a portrait from a relatively close distance of about 2 meters, which is a distance that is conducive to some communication, to talking with my subject in a quiet voice. My choice of 3 primes has a lot of overlap between those focal length ranges. But I find it useful because you can use one of 2 primes to achieve the same goal. Now you might look at it differently and completely separate between the wide end and the long end. For example, with a 24 and a 35 set on the wide end, and an 85 or even a longer lens on the long end. That might give you even more versatility than a zoom lens, if this is what you are after, if there is a clear separation between 2 genres you like to shoot, or different conditions in which different ranges of focal length might come handy. To conclude, a zoom lens can be replaced by a 3 prime solution quite easily. And each of those options gives you some opportunities and some limitations. Zoom lenses are more versatile, they're more convenient, especially if you cannot move much while shooting. While primes are more suited to low light, to subject separation at the wide end of the focal range, and they are also more conductive to composition. You can make better photos, I think, than zooms, because you are not merely concentrating on framing the shot, but also in composing it, looking at the different elements making it, and trying to optimize the relations between them. That will be all for today. If you wish to support my channel, please buy me a coffee down in the description below. It's a nice gesture between gentlemen. So thank you for watching, and see you again soon.